All right, jumping right in. Let's do a little exercise. This is my hand, right? I have a hand. But if I say I am hand, that sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? But this is something that we actually kind of do because somebody says, hey, I have a model for a pattern of behavior that matches with the pattern of behavior you have. And we call it this. And all of a sudden you say, I am this. So I have a model for a pattern behavior which shows um, low mood, low affect, low energy, right? And I say this is depression. And I look at you and you have low mood and low affect and low energy. And I say, you might be experiencing this, right? That makes perfect sense. But when we look at a person and we go, you have depression, and the person goes, I'm depressed, and somebody goes, yeah, right, you're depressed. That's like saying I'm hand, right? I'm a lot more than my hand. I'm not hand, right? And I know this is nitpicky in a sense, and if it were just semantics, I'd leave it alone. But we send ourselves messages with the things we say, whether it's a thought we have inside our own head, an inner dialogue, or it's something we say outwardly to others. Um, we hear that at a subconscious level. There's like a little kid in the room at all times listening to the grown-ups. Can't quite make sense of it, but wants to make good on it. And that little inner kid is going to be basically trying to hear and do the best they can with very limited knowledge to act in accord with what's being said, right? And that's our subconscious. And when we say, I'm depressed, the subconscious is like, oh, okay, what do depressed people do? Let's do that, right? And I'm not saying that the emotional state or the struggles aren't real. I'm just saying that on top of that, we, instead of making it better, we actually compound the problem by telling an unconscious part of us to go ahead and do the things that are consistent with this message we're sending. And that on its own could induce that state, that struggle. And that's where I'm looking, where we say, look, having a model and a name for something that we can apply in a useful way, that's fine. I have no problem with that. I'm not saying do away with all diagnoses, models, whatever. We can label behavior, we can identify patterns, yeah. It's when we start to label people, when we start to tell people to take on that identity, I think we're doing more harm than good because what, again, what we think is what we believe, and what we believe is what we act out. So we end up acting out the life of a depressed person, right? A person with depression, not even a depressed person. That's not, see, it's hard because it's so baked into our language. But we have to understand that language runs two ways. What we put out there comes back as information to us again. So right? It takes practice to say this, and it's cumbersome. I appreciate that in modern English, we like to be punchy, concise, right? We want to be very efficient in what we say. So saying, I'm depressed, that's quick, that's easy, that conveys a lot. But unfortunately, it conveys a lot to parts of us that shouldn't be getting that message if we want them to move in the opposite direction. So, if you're in really bad shape, it's like, all right, we got to figure this out and pull up, right? And you send the message like this is what we're doing. The subconscious will move toward it. So what we say matters. What we say matters a lot. And I think that it's evidenced by the fact that people become dysfunctionally identified with it. To say, I identify as somebody who has these issues in the mix of my larger life, my complete identity. That's cool. You can own the components of who you are without surrendering who you are to the components. So this is the thought about how I try to be very careful. And you saw me screw up. It's not like, oh, busted, got you. It's just noticing and correcting and saying, I'm sorry, honey, I didn't mean that. You realize the kid's in the room and you're like, you know what, let me say that differently. And that's where we get good at sending these messages inward to the levels that we're not even aware of. And it's most of us is almost inaccessible to us, but we do have the power to send messages to this inaccessible place and say, hey, hey, we identify that I have low mood, affect, energy. Um, that's not consistent with our values, and this is another reason having a sense of our values is important. If your values are to like sit as still as possible, eat as much junk food as possible, watch as much Netflix as possible, see as little daylight as a human can survive on, cool. Like, then you're consistent with your values. There should be no dissonance. There should be no problem. You're on your mission. That's okay. But if that's not your mission, if your mission is something else and the values to be able to sustain that mission are different, where it says I need to be someone who takes care of myself. I'm rested, I'm hydrated, I'm ready for action. I need to be somebody who has a certain kind of order in my life, that these things are provided for. I need to be the kind of person who can go out and and gather what is necessary and assemble it so that I can execute on this mission. Okay, then sitting still, eating junk food, watching a flickering screen isn't really going to help you with that. So, this is one set of values. This is sort of an action set of values. I think we have core values, we have guiding principles, we have mission specific values, right? So, it's good that we get a core sense down and then we start to branch out and say, no, you know what? That's more of a guiding principle than a core value, right? Like core values, like what would I move to protect even at the risk of life and limb, right? Like what is that? And what is it I can't live without? If you took this away, would I have to completely reinvent myself because the person I am is so contingent upon that, right? Like these are the core values. And then there are the guiding principles. Like when I look at a situation, what are the filters? What in what order do I filter things out? And it becomes knowing your razors. How do you cut one from the other? That you know that this is really the key thing, that if it's not consistent with my first value, it doesn't matter if it's consistent with my fourth, right? Like you know the order of things. And when it comes to missions, being able to say like this is the mission I'm on in my life right now. Maybe not even my life's mission. That's big. You only get one. I think most of us have different missions at different levels, and this being the mission at hand, what do I need for that? Then you have mission values, and you say it's not worth pursuing if these things aren't true. It's only going to be in its fullest glory when it's all said and done if I abide by these principles, right? It's this work. And in doing that, we move toward that. And so when we are off track, when we're lost, when we're in a place we don't want to be, identifying where we want to be, what's necessary for that, implementing that and getting forward on it is is the kind of step that actually allows us to dislodge ourselves from the stuckness wherever we're jammed up and to move in the direction we'd prefer. And I think that that's why I make a big point about identity and identifying with things and the language we use. This is all critical. And it's not a small matter when you realize the leverage, the impact it has. It's said that our conscious mind is about 5% of our total cognitive power. And I'm thinking about the little ways in which we can get leverage on the other 90%, 95%, and try to make the moves at a level where the whole system orients around that. There's a natural subsequent movement based on what's going on there that conveys us rather than us clawing tooth and nail, inch by inch. It's the force that gets up under us and propels us. The same as we feel compelled to do things we'd rather not. You can sort of take back the plane from the hijackers and get in there and say, no, the air marshal's running this now. Sit down. Like you got to get in there and establish order. So, yeah, this is about understanding the impact language has, why it is we don't want to identify too strongly with things, and how creating space around these things allows us to work with them a little differently. So, I guess the message, the takeaway would be, if you identify as someone who has a condition, and it doesn't have to be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be an eating disorder, an addiction, it could be um, attachment issues. All of these things are changeable. There's very little that we don't have the power to change in these domains nowadays. And so if you are struggling with any of these things that have a label, and you're inclined to say, I'm anxious, I'm avoidant, I'm an addict, like, you just bring it down to this thing that's like the truth of you, your subconscious mind's going to hear that, getting close with it, and do everything to serve and protect. Like, that's what that part of the subconscious wants to do. And I don't know that we want to preserve that. I don't know that we want to work for that, to be in this state that becomes an identity and a way of life, where saying, I'm the kind of person who can heal, I'm the kind of person who can get forward, I'm the kind of person who has a vision for my future that looks like this, and I hold that foremost when I'm making decisions about all the little things every day. It's all the little choices, how they add up. And we make the choice to shift our focus toward that, perhaps identify with it as a part of us, a part of our life mission, but keep that space that allows us to work with it appropriately, not just glom on and fuse with it like some weird symbiote. Um, I think in there we can really get the movement we want without having to struggle for it, like I said, tooth and nail. So, yeah, here's to finding a way to put the wind at our back and chart a course we actually want to sail along. So I hope that's helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next round. Thank you as always for joining me. Take care.